Okay, welcome to Level 1 Science Online with Henny van Vieren. Good morning, Year 11s. I hope you guys are still having fun in lockdown. At least we had a great weekend. I hope you got out, got away from your computers, got away from the academic work. We had a fun time walking down to the beach and finding different animals and all kind of stuff. So, yeah, let's make the best of what we have. Anyways, today we have to go further, and in the last lesson I asked you to look at mutations and genetic variation, and today we'll build on that. Okay, so here we go. Alrighty, so you looked at internal and external variation. So this lion, you can see it's been in a lot of fights, and just because he's got scars on his face doesn't mean that his children will have scars on their faces. That was a belief that was incorrect, and way before Darwin, that if a giraffe was reaching up for the higher leaves and reaching and reaching and reaching, and his neck became longer, his child will have a longer neck. But that, of course, is not the truth. We know that the only way that we can have a new phenotype or a new look, external appearance, is by having a mutation. And that new mutation needs to be in the gametes. Okay? And the gametes, that is your egg and sperm. And also, that mutation needs to be in a gamete, but more than that, that mutated egg and mutated sperm, or mutated sperm, have to be the ones that are fertilized and produces the zygote. Okay, so this is very important. Whereas, if you have a tumor that develop in your somatic cells, the body cells, let's say you have a huge tumor on your face, then it will change your appearance. It will change your phenotype for sure. But do you pass that on to your children? No, you do not. Because the mutation is not in your gametes. That is the egg and the sperm. Now, environmental variation, you know that hydrangeas, if you have a soil that is more acid and a soil that is more base, then they have different colors. And we went through some of these past papers. Okay. So, as I said, the only way that you can have a new phenotype is by a mutation. Now, most mutations are actually silent. They have no effect because they are so tiny that our body has got redundancy built into it, which means it's got a backup plan. Most of them are silent, but when you have mutations, frequently they result in the death of the offspring, and usually even before they are born, because the gene in which mutation occurs creates an incorrect protein. Very occasionally, mutations produce a new type of protein, which gives the organism an advantage over others in adapting to its environment. And this happens purely by chance. You guys need to remember that. It's not as if, hey, the leaves of this tree that I love, if I'm this beetle, is no longer a bluish green, but it's becoming darker green. There's no way that he can decide, I'm going to mutate to become a greener beetle, and I mutate. No, that is not how it works. It is purely by chance. And when, purely by chance, an organism develops that has a different phenotype, but this phenotype is a better fit for the environment. Remember, natural selection is not about the survival of the fittest, but is the survival of the best fit. And between these two beetles, suddenly, if the tree is growing darker and darker, then this one will be less likely to be seen by the predators, and consequently he will have more babies, and more of his mutated genes will be passed on, even one or two only, and then they will also be more successful, and they will, one or two will have more babies than the others, and eventually the gene will be very widespread in the population because of natural selection. Okay, it's a slight advantage over the others, but you are better fit for your environment, and it takes generations to then become the dominant gene. Okay, so that's what it says here. The organism containing the mutation will have more chance of surviving than those individuals without it, and it will pass the mutated gene on to the next generation more successfully. It's all about leaving your DNA behind. And if I can be better at it and have one or two more babies than you, then because of how I look or because of some other adaptation, then it's going to be naturally selecting for me. Mutations increase variation in a population by adding new types of alleles. The only way you get a new allele is through a mutation. Now, mutations are caused by random change in the sequence of the bases in the DNA. Remember, if you look at a gene, a mutation is always, it changes the order of your DNA sequence. And that DNA sequence codes for a very specific protein. And that code is affected when there's something that changes. So if you look here at the bottom, you can see here's our original chromosome, A, B, C, D, E, F. But then there's a deletion mutation, and it deleted the B, and suddenly now we have A, C, D, E, F. Okay? And when you have A, C, D, E, F, it will change the amino acid sequence, and that changes your protein. And the amino acids come because of the specific codons, we call them, but you don't have to worry about that. It's just you need to know that that will give a specific amino acid sequence, which then makes up your protein, whereas this one, the mutated one, will give a different amino acid sequence, which changes the phenotype, the physical feature phenotype. And remember, we said only mutations that occur in the gametes, that's egg and sperm, usually during the process of meiosis, and meiosis is when we make egg and sperm, can be inherited by the next generation. It may not be expressed or seen as a physical trait in the offspring. It can be recessive. And so consequently the parents won't even know they have an affected allele. And then when you have two parents with the same recessive allele, suddenly it can be brought to the fore. So mutations can occur in the adult body cells, somatic cells, but these will not be inherited. We've talked about that. So here are some mutagens. A mutagen is a mutation causing agent. Okay, so inheritable genetic disorders is, now if we talk about inheritable genetic disorders, this is done in the gamete. You get that from your mom and your dad. So if they have a genetic disorder and it affects the gametes, then it will be passed on to you. But if we look at these, UV radiation, both natural sunlight and tanning beds give you UV radiation, and we all know that about that in New Zealand and Australia specifically because of skin cancer, melanoma. Okay. And that is because the ultraviolet radiation from the sun, and where we are, the ozone is a lot thinner than in the rest of the world, and consequently that UV radiation has got enough energy to knock some of the electrons off your DNA. And if it knocks the electrons off, it actually can change the sequence of your base pairs. Okay, so radiation, also X-rays, and I'm sure a lot of you watched recently Chernobyl. And if you haven't, it is actually on ETV. You don't even have to have Amazon or anything that you can have ETV, which is through the school, remember. You can watch the whole series on there. But if you have too much X-rays, it can cause an issue. That's why they will only take X-rays if they really need to. Then cigarette smoke, you all know about that. That causes lung cancer. Certain chemicals like too much nitrates and preservatives, even barbecuing contains a mutagenic chemical in food. And then benzoyl peroxide, which is a common ingredient in acne products. If you expose yourself to very high levels of that, it can be what is called a carcinogen. A carcinogen is a cancer causing agent, and cancers are mutations of the cell, and it's usually a mutation that prevents the cell from stop growing, and it just grows and grows, and that's called a tumor. Then we also have infectious agents. Here's one called Helicobacter pylori. This is an awesome little bug. He looks like a helix, can you see that? And he actually lives in your stomach. He actually can survive in that acid environment. And what he does, he's like a corkscrew, and he corkscrews himself into your stomach lining. And then he sits there and he waits for your food to come by, and then he eats from the food. But unfortunately, as he's corkscrewing himself down into that, he's going through the mucus layer which protects your own stomach lining cells. And now the acid seeps down his little body and gets to our cells, and your stomach literally starts to dissolve itself with its own stomach acid, and that causes ulcers. And if you have a lot of these guys and you have a lot of ulcers, then it can cause stomach cancer. The interesting thing is, the guy who developed the treatment for it was a big race between a New Zealander and an Australian. And typical New Zealander, to prove that it worked, he took a vial full of these Helicobacter pylori, and he swallowed it on purpose. So he infected himself on purpose to show that his way of treating it works. I've actually met this doctor. He's a pathologist, and yes, luckily his treatment did work. Anyways, then on this side we have the human papillomavirus, okay, or HPV, and this is a virus that causes cervical cancer. Now, I hope that all of you have gotten the immunization against HPV. I think you get it in year 8. I'm not sure, but if you haven't got it, please go and get it, because this is actually a sexually transmitted disease. And what it can cause is cervical cancer, it can cause mouth cancer, lip cancer, tongue cancer, throat cancer, and also anal cancer. And that is because it is carried both in the male and the female, and when you have intercourse, you spread this virus. So the funny thing is, boys will have it and almost never know that they have it. Whereas girls, they then have a much higher frequency of getting cervical cancer, and at the moment there's about 80 deaths a year in New Zealand amongst young women under the age of 30 due to human papillomavirus. But we have a jab. You get a jab and you don't get cancer. Isn't that amazing? So think about it. Or guys, if the boys especially, you have a jab and you don't give someone else cancer. Just think about that. It's yeah, please make sure to get your HPV immunization if you haven't got it yet. Okay. But yeah, these are some viruses and bacteria that can actually cause cancers and mutations. So if we look at genetic disorders, they are passed down from parents. Things like Down syndrome can be a disorder, and sickle cell anemia and cystic fibrosis and so forth. So this is sickle cell anemia. Your normal hemoglobin looks basically like that, as a folded protein, and then it forms this kind of it's a double-sided frisbee, so there's a concave on both sides. So it's almost a donut, but the hole is not all the way through. Take some Play-Doh and just squeeze it, then you have normal red blood cell. But when you have sickle cell anemia, this genetic disorder, it creates this shape of red blood cell, and these cannot carry blood well, and also then they can cause to get stuck in your capillaries and so forth. Okay, and this is a recessive gene, but the very interesting thing is that sickle cell anemia in Africa specifically, it helps people not to get malaria, or actually when they get malaria they don't get as sick. So because of this disorder, if you have normal red blood cells and these sickle cells, you have a much lower chance of dying from malaria. So that's why you find this sickle cell way more in Africa than in other places where there are no malaria, because if there's no malaria, you're not going to be natural selected. You won't be a better fit because of malaria. You all understand that. Natural selection. It's just about the best fit. Okay. So a mutation is a permanent change in the base sequence. This is just our summary of the DNA strand. Either single bases or segments can be lost. Base sequences change can result in the formation of new alleles, and those new alleles can give rise to a new phenotype. A new allele can code for the new protein that leads to a new trait or phenotype, and an organism with a mutation may have a new structure or function as a result of that phenotype. Most mutations are harmful, which reduce the chance of survival and reproduction, and some new phenotypes may increase the organism's chances of survival or sexual reproduction. A mutated allele that increases this will increase in the frequency very quickly in the population. So here's a case study in CEA. The question is, one process that produces genetic variation is mutations. Explain what mutations are and how they contribute to genetic variation. In your answer, you should state, what is a mutation? Easy. A mutation is a permanent change in the sequence, in the base sequence of a gene due to a change. Okay, the change of the order of the bases in your gene, but it's a permanent change. The effect of the mutation on the genes, alleles, and DNA. The effect of the mutation on genes is that it changes the base sequence. When it changes the base sequence, that changes the allele because it changes the protein, and hence if it creates a new allele, and if that creates a new allele and it is in the somatic cells, or sorry, not in the somatic cells but in the gametic cells, then it can be passed on and kept in the DNA for the offspring. But somatic cells will not be. So if you look at these goldfish, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they look like balloons. There obviously was a mutation, and the goldfish breeder said, oh, people are going to love these fat fish. And then they take them and they breed them with each other to make basically a subspecies that only has these weird pop out eyes, and I don't know, to me it just looks terrible. But yeah, it's kind of similar if you think about a bulldog, or if you think about the French bulldog or the pug. They have these flat faces. There's no, as far as I know, there's no advantage of having that except cuteness. So yeah, same type of idea. Okay, so again, change in the genetic material, that's a mutation. The base sequence change in the gene changes. This results in completely new alleles. If the mutation occurs in the gamete, then these alleles have the possibility of being passed on to the offspring. And then remember to add something here, please. If the gamete that carries the mutation is fertilized, that is important, because if you make sperm and a quarter of them have a mutation, you still have a 75% chance of not passing on that mutation. Okay. If mutation occurs in body cells, only the one individual will show variation, and it will not be passed on to the offspring. Mutations are more often than not harmful if they occur in the part of the DNA that codes for trait. And we said individuals born with mutations will frequently die and pass on before they pass on the mutation. If the new allele is beneficial and increases survival, the production of the offspring is often spread quickly. Okay, so this was in 2017, and if you look at a leopard versus a black panther, you can see that some leopards or jaguars have mutation causing them to have a black coat. They are known as black panthers. How can this mutation cause the coat color to be different? In your answer, you should explain the term DNA, gene, allele, phenotype, mutation, and how this color changes occur. The DNA diagram beside may help you. It's exactly the same as what we just said. And you see they repeat the same question. And then you can simply say that if this jaguar, this black panther, is now a nocturnal animal or lives in a very dark forest, this is a wonderful adaptive annotation. And consequently, his genes will spread more fastly because he will be stronger, will eat more, be best fit for his environment, and have more offspring. And then his offspring that also show the same phenotype will have the same. They'll be stronger, fitter, and have more offspring. I'm not going to read through all of this. You have the presentation online on the OneDrive, so you can read through that again. But guys, you have to answer it in these words. Okay, a gene is a length of DNA that codes for a particular characteristics. That characteristic is called a phenotype. An allele is an alternative form of that. The only way that a new allele can be happen is a mutation. A mutation is a permanent change in the genetic material, in the base sequence, they should say there. When a mutation occurs, the base sequence of the gene changes. This results in completely new alleles. But the mutation has to occur in the gamete before it can be passed on to the offspring. And that gamete carrying the mutation needs to be fertilized. Otherwise, it is called a somatic mutation, and that is not passed on. Okay, and some sources of variation. I just want to quickly see where we are. Yeah, just 3 more slides. So just for interest sake, I used to work in the forestry industry, and what you see here is not only is actually the same DNA. Every single one of these trees are clones. Okay, so basically cloning is when you take a cutting of a plant and you grow a new plant. I hope that some of you would have been with your grandmother or somebody that you know, and they say, "Oh, I love this plant, can I take a cutting?" And then they take it home and they put it in some mortar at home on the windowsill, and it grows roots, and then they can plant it. And that is cloning, because if you think about it, that little piece of plant material that they took and then it grew roots and you could plant it again, it's the same DNA that was part of the big plant. So what they're doing here, and this is paper industry, if a paper maker can have literally the same DNA in every one of the pieces of wood that comes in, he can set his parameters very finely to know what's going to happen. But you watch that thing about the banana, where all the Cavendish bananas are clones. They are all the same DNA. Every time you eat a banana, the DNA is the same. And if you have one disease like the banana rust that is now going through it, then it is highly susceptible to that disease. And that is the issue. That is why we need genetic variation, for the species to survive. Okay. Over here, here's some mutations that obviously is not good. They do not give an advantage. Okay, you can see this little lamb. They call them spider lambs. You can count the legs: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 legs. And the lamb would obviously not survive in the wild, which is tragic. And this little cat that is born with only one single eye. I wonder if the 2 eyes merged or what is going on there. But again, there's no advantage for this, and they will most likely pass away before they can reproduce. Here's some interesting mutations amongst humans. So this boy, for the life of me, I can never remember the name of the syndrome, but basically their cells age very, very fast. As he's standing there, he's probably about 12 years old, but you can see he looks like an 80-year-old, and they don't get very old. It's just a very rare genetic condition. Over here we have the wolf people of Mexico. It's basically a bunch of people that have hair all over their faces. They work at a freak show, unfortunately, but that's how they make their money, and their offspring also look like them. And there was obviously a mutation that gave them this. But is it currently an advantage to look like this? No. But let's imagine we suddenly go into an ice age, and you might need facial protection from cold. Then that might have been a mutation that could be advantageous, and that might have then created a better natural fit. But in the current situation, it's not. Okay, and that's where we're going to stop for today. So basically genetic variation and mutations. Alright. Thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it. I'm not going to give you any Education Perfect work or any SciPad stuff to do today, but I want you to please catch up with the work that you might have not done. Alright. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Speak to you later. Bye.